Hello, I'm Chris Fowler, and welcome to Sports Century. Born on the 4th of July, most of his life has been a rebellion against authority and a struggle for independence. Al Davis thrives on chaos, much of it his creation, and boasts that he would rather be feared than respected. As we'll see in the next half hour, the man who specializes in jumpsuits and lawsuits, who has made the Raiders a refuge for renegades and the discarded, remains obsessed with the one foe he has never beaten and never will.
He has the ability to control a lot of situations, but he doesn't have the ability to control life or death. It really, really hurts him when somebody he's friendly with or somebody that he knows has a physical problem.
I lay there for 5 months, and I couldn't do this, I couldn't blink an eye, I couldn't utter a sound. He used to come up about 9 o'clock all by himself, and he would stand by my bedside, and Al Davis would say, "Del, you're not gonna die." He said, "You are a Raider, and Raiders don't die."
As he's gotten older, he's become more absorbed with the subject of death. He's a regular attendant at funerals of people who've passed away, who've come into his life. Whether they're friends or enemies, he goes anyhow. He went to Pete Rozelle's funeral, and Pete Rozelle was his arch enemy for most of his adult career.
That's the only thing that I don't think I've licked in my life, that I wasn't able to save some people who were dying.
In 1979, the shadow of death fell across Davis when his wife Carol lapsed into a coma after suffering a heart attack.
At that particular time, there were some doctors telling him that she wouldn't come out of it. He refused to believe that.
He sat up around the clock, day in and day out, talking into her ear to keep her brain functioning.
On the 17th day of this coma, she comes out of it. A woman that was supposed to die or at the very most be a vegetable gained 97% of her faculties back in the course of that year, largely just through Al Davis's will.
He believes that there's a way to beat death. I mean, he's actually had these conversations. He said, we haven't dominated that death thing yet. Yet.
Al Davis was a strange guy. As we were loosening up on pregame and we're out there exercising and stretching out, he would walk and look at all the players.
I started thinking it was so weird. He just was like one of these guys, let you know that he's close enough to touch you.
The stuff he used to wear, I mean, it was kind of Elvis Presley type, Liberace kind of stuff, you know, and we'd say stuff to him about that and never seemed to bother him.
You have this man who has very few close associations in the football world, almost a maniacal attitude with respect to privacy.
Al Davis thinks everybody's out to get him. He's paranoid about it. He's an us against them kind of guy.
You go out to the Raiders training camp and they're very high fences with green wind screens. They've got guards posted so that if anybody's trying to look over the screen, they're going to get shooed away.
I think he loves the image of being sort of a gangster type of guy. Dangerous, unpredictable, yet brilliant.
He's a smart, fiendish kind of man. His one great hero in life is Adolf Hitler. That gives you some perspective on him.
In 1939, when Davis was 10, Hitler's blitzkrieg struck like lightning into the heart of Eastern Europe. More than 40 years later, in an interview with writer Gary Smith, the Raiders' owner recalled an impressionable boy's obsession with the Nazi Army's tactical brilliance, despite the dark implications to his own heritage.
You got this Jewish kid who's part of a culture who's being wiped out systematically by Hitler, but yet Al was fascinated by what Hitler was doing, and just the boldness and the brazenness of Hitler's reach for power was something that hit Al Davis on a real gut level.
the specter of a Jewish kid admiring Hitler, you have to ask yourself, is Al Davis completely sane to even contemplate something like that?
When he says something really outrageous, as he did in that Gary Smith article and saying he admired Hitler, the people that love him just laugh and say, well, that's Al, you know. And the other side say the same thing. That's Al, you know, he's an evil person.
I think Al Davis was always regarded by some people as a rebel simply because he didn't always adhere to the party line. He was always very opinionated. You knew that if Al Davis made a move, it was going to be controversial in some way. It was going to be attention-getting for sure.
Listen, if you live your life worrying about what people think and what people say and who's good or who's bad, you'll never take a step.
He hired the first Hispanic American NFL coach. He hired the first African American coach of the modern era. And the person who we all believe will succeed him when he's gone is a woman.
He's about opportunity, and he gave opportunity to me as a 32-year-old head coach. He's one that is open to anything.
He will sit at a table with 30 other owners of National Football League teams and defy every one of them, sue them.
You have to wonder, what is in the man's mind that drives him? Not to think about retirement, but to think about more conquest. He's thinking about what 30-year-old owner he's going to show up as a fool because he's still smarter than the rest of football. This is something Al Davis dreamed of when he was a kid.
Born in 1929 to Rose and Louis Davis, Al and his older brother Jerry were raised in a comfortable Jewish home in Brooklyn.
Everybody calls him a gutter fighter, you know, a kid who came from nothing. He came from very high middle-class surroundings. His father was a very successful garment manufacturer, so he didn't really want for anything growing up.
The father cut no slack. You know, if they were running on the beach, he'd run his boys to their knees. If they came home with a B, it was pretty much scorned. You had to have an A. So he grew up in a house where you had to find a way to make it happen. You had to win.
Even as a young guy, I had a dream that I would build the finest organization in professional sports.
Alan was wonderfully popular with girls. He was good-looking, he's charming, and he's bright.
There's nothing in his background to suggest that he was persecuted, but he always acted that way. He always acted as if people were against him, that he was the underdog. He had to prove himself constantly.
He did. At 21, Davis was a line coach for Adelphi College. At 33, he was head coach and general manager of the Raiders in the emerging AFL in 1963. 3 years later, he was hired as the league's commissioner. His plan was to wage a dirty war against his NFL counterpart, the smooth, diplomatic Pete Rozelle.
There was nothing nice about this. It was a matter of survival. Al was the one cog that we used to go ahead and intimidate the National Football League.
We got commitments from about 6 to 8 of their great players, several of them quarterbacks. We said that we would hold one team totally hostage.
What Davis didn't know was that the secret peace talks between the leagues had been underway even before he started his talent raids. In June of 1966, the war ended.
I had to go over and tell Al that there was a merger and that the commissioner of the combined leagues would be Pete Rozelle.
And he got no support from his own owners. I think he was very bitter about that.
We won the war, and they know it. And the peacemakers made the peace, which was fine with me.
Al Davis is a man who would have been king. He wanted to be the commissioner of all the footballs, not just the ones the AFL was kicking around.
With his ambitions still burning, Davis returned to Oakland, this time as managing general partner. While he solidified his control by outmaneuvering one of his two partners and outliving the other, he occasionally skirmished with Rozelle. In 1980, 3 years after he cast the only vote against the commissioner's new contract, Davis committed an act of open rebellion.
Al was going to move to Los Angeles without asking Pete's permission. There was a touch of arrogance of Al in doing that, which is Al's style. He's tough. And Roselle resented the fact that Davis was shoving this down his throat, and he decided to fight it.
We're fighting for a principle. We don't think the antitrust laws were intended to let a team just get up and move after 12 straight years of sellouts.
The National Football League acted in bad faith with no polling, secret and sneaky lawsuits, just a number and a myriad of things that were totally unfair and totally restrictive.
The league was unanimous in believing the Raiders should stay up in Oakland. Only a few clubs abstained on that. I think it was unfortunate that got as personal as it was, but that's the nature of court fights.
Here you had a member of the league testifying and fighting his partners, and we'd never been associated with that type of a thing before.
When someone within your ranks sues you, it just makes you look very inept and amateurish. And that's hurt the fraternity of NFL owners.
The war began and it lasted several years, and the NFL lost, and the Raiders did move to Los Angeles.
I don't really have that much respect for Pete Rozelle, especially when I thought his credibility was destroyed in this case.
He drove my buddy Pete Rozelle out of the business, again with litigation and testifying against him.
But Roselle's exit in 1989 was not the end of Davis's private war against the system. He continued to be embroiled in several lawsuits with the NFL and the city of Oakland, where he returned after 13 seasons of disappointing profits in Los Angeles. Seeking billions of dollars in the courts, the Brooklyn boy became an island with all its bridges burned.
His fellow owners despise him. At one point talked about trying to form a coalition to get him kicked out of the league.
There may only be one way to do it, and that's Al Davis's way. Al seems to enjoy a fight.
My personal opinion is that Al makes doing business more difficult.
Al believes that if he is disruptive, that he can function in chaos better than someone else.
He had no business pursuing that litigation with such vigor and such intensity to try to tear us down. I'm angry. I'm angry. And Art Modell gets angry at Al Davis, who loses the last friend he has in the NFL.
I firmly believe that Al is at a stage where he likes that turmoil. There's been a lawsuit going on for, what, the last 25 years? I think he likes that. I think he likes that confrontation. You know, if it isn't there, he's going to start it.
Al Davis would give you this test. If you could only have one thing, what would you pick? Power, money, love. And if you didn't pick power, you know, you were a fool forever. Because if you had power, you could get everything else.
He wanted to make every single decision that had anything to do with the Raiders. And that was his goal. That's where he was. That's where he wanted it. That's where he kept it.
He knows everything that's going on in his organization, from what the equipment man is doing to what shoelaces Tim Brown wore.
At the point that Al would pull onto the parking lot, he's here, and never put a name with it, but he's here.
There's an atmosphere in the Raider organization of Big Brother looking over you. Is the coach really in charge?
Between 1963 and 1985, the Raiders won more games than any team in pro football, 248. Reaching 4 Super Bowls, they triumphed 3 times. Then they hit a wall of mediocrity from 1986 to 1999, taking just 1 division title as Davis cycled through 6 head coaches.
Al Davis has never really given up being head coach of the Raiders, so he's had problems with strong-willed coaches who wanted to do it their way, not the Raider way.
He had Shanahan there. Shanahan wanted to change things. You're out. You know, that old expression, it's his way or the highway. It's that way.
There was a hint that maybe John Gruden was actually running things, but we learned quickly enough that he wasn't, and maybe that was the reason John Gruden left.
He told me when he hired me, the guy that has to answer to everything is you. But also, he was on your side, and he was in your corner, and he did everything he could to help you win.
He studies as much film or more film than the coaches do.
Al Davis was at every practice, you know, showed up all the time, was always around, very involved. But the word on the street was that, you know, Al was the one calling the shot.
Terrible moves, an inability to admit mistakes, constantly trying to reinvent himself with the same old tired tricks of the past, while other people moved past him.
Through his influence, he decided to set a Hall of Fame player like Marcus Allen on the bench when we needed it. We had two very gifted receivers that Al Davis, for no unforeseen reason, decided to set those two guys on the bench. And so, yeah, I think that those were times that his overbearing influence definitely could have hurt the team.
Despite occasional feuds with such players as Marcus Allen and Ken Stabler, Davis retained the respect for most of his players.
I have nothing but good things to say about him because he was always straight up with me and he paid us well.
Al was a guy where you felt like you could go to him and talk about your problems, and a lot of people did.
Now, there are a lot of people hate him in the NFL because he's beating them in the courts and he's beating them on the field. But he is extremely gracious and great to all his ex-players.
If you wore that silver and black in Al Davis' book, you were a part of him and you were family.
I think every player, whether he admits it or not, towards the twilight of his career, wants to go play for the Raiders. I saw Al Davis do that with many players. He took guys at the end of their career and gave them life.
We'll grow and be tough now. Fight with them and just keep sticking it to them. Just we'll fight with them.
The Raiders is a persona team. We walk with a different swagger than other teams. We talk with a different swagger than other teams.
No ties and jackets, no dress codes, no hours, no rules, hardly.
We got the reputation of being a lot of thugs and ne'er-do-wells and ex-convicts, maybe.
We always thought that they were against us. It was us against the ledge. It was us against everyone.
And we'll get in the foxhole. Come on. Okay, guys, let's get in the foxhole. We're the Raiders. We're the Raiders.
It meant that you were on the most feared team in the National Football League. You would cheap shot. You would try and intimidate an official. You would try to stretch the rules. You live in the gray area, and you knew that you'd be rewarded for it.
I always sensed that Al had this way that he wanted to do it, and it really didn't matter what the rules were. Al was going to do it his own way, and that used to trouble me a little bit.
He had players who, you know, were charged with rape, players who were picked up for drunken driving, carrying guns. His kind of outsiders, rebels attitude fit in with those kind of players, and they all became the outcasts who were going to show the establishment who they were and what they could be.
You want to give your family a better life, so Rent-A-Center makes it easy to get the things your family wants and needs.
I don't think Al Davis can say or do anything that affects his image, because there are people who love him, think he walks on water. There's the larger group of people that hate him, and nothing is going to change the opinion of either one.
Al Davis is totally different from the perception. The picture you have of Al Davis, and he doesn't try and stop this either. The picture you have of Al Davis is over here, and the real Al Davis is the complete opposite. He's over here.
Al doesn't want anybody to think he has a soft spot. By design, I believe.
We had an assistant coach in New England who had coached with the Raiders. 3 or 4 years later, he got cancer. He died. He left behind a wife and some children. They had no money. Al paid for the funeral. Al gave money to the family.
If you're a friend of his and you're loyal to him, he'll be loyal to you. no matter what happens. Tell you one thing you find out about him. Don't try to screw him, man. You make a mistake with him and you're going to pay for it.
It runs the gamut. You hear stories about, him being totally ruthless, and then on the other end of the spectrum, being so philanthropic it's beyond comprehension.
He's all those things at different times. He can be petty, he can be generous. He's just a mass of contradictions.
In 2003, Davis reached his 5th Super Bowl and lost to a coach he let go only a year earlier. As the battle fires of his passionate march continue to flare, Davis remained an elusive figure. Dressed in black or white, his portrait blurs into a murky gray, or perhaps silver, depending on one's point of view.
Is he going to be remembered for the great Super Bowl teams, for the passion which he brought the game on the field? Or is he going to be remembered for the dispassionate way that he moved his franchise around off the field and sued people left and right and treated fans like they were third-string quarterbacks?
He assembles competitive teams almost all the time, and you have to give him credit for that. A lot of people don't like to because they don't like him.
I think there's a ton of respect for Al Davis in this league, and they're always looking over their shoulder. Nobody wants to deal with him because they think he'll beat them.
Al recognizes new ideas better than anyone that I know in the NFL.
As good a football man as any owner in the history of this league, even including George Halas. Professionally, he's been a big disappointment to me.
It's praising myself, but I've done more than anyone else. Yeah, I've lived my dream, but I thought I would live my dream. I thought I would. But you got to go get it. You got to go fight for it. You got to dominate it.
As Marie Lombardi once wrote Caroli and I, that's Carol, my wife, a note after we had won our first Super Bowl: enjoy it now, because fame is fleeting. And she wrote again, enjoy it while you can.
If there's anything we've ever done that I'm particularly proud of, I would have to say that the perpetuation of the greatness of the Raiders, to take a professional football team and give it a distinct characteristic that's different from all others. The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song, he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. I had a dream that someday I would build the finest organization in professional sports. I had certain philosophies of my own that had to become part of whatever I was to do. And that was, number one, what I call the vertical game. We were going to stretch the field vertically. When we came out of the huddle, we weren't looking for first downs. We didn't want to move the chains. We wanted touchdowns. We wanted the big play, the quick strike. It's number one to say you want to do that. It's number two to say that you have the players to do it, but it's number three to do it. To do it on first down of any football game for that defense that you're playing against. For those cornerbacks who play out there on the corners, to know that the Raiders that are coming at you, they're coming at you on top, and they've got the speed to do it, and they will do it. It's like having the bomb and being willing to drop it. The adage that goes around in professional football, and I hear everyone say it, take what they give you. That all sounds good to everybody, but I always went the other way. We're going to take what we want. The defensive theory evolved early on in the 60s. To number one, pressure. Put pressure on the pocket. We do believe that this is a game psychologically of intimidation
speaking of fear. I don't mean cowardly fear, but fear. And I think this, that somewhere within the first 5 to 10 plays of the game, the other team's quarterback must go down. And he must go down hard. That alone sets a tempo for a game. Play hard, try not to make mistakes, but don't worry about mistakes because there's only one thing that counts. Just win. Commitment to excellence. Is a commitment to excellence. The flame that would burn brightest here is the will to win. Is the will to win. Is the will to win.
Your commitment to excellence and your will to win will endure forever. You will magnificent.
The great games we've played in, we could get the greatest coaches, the greatest players. We may take a player in who has been a failure somewhere else, but it's predicated on bringing them into an environment that can inspire in them the will to do great. And they have done great.
Stout back, looking right now. He'll never look again. Not this time, as Alzado gets another sack.
We went into many of the predominant black schools to take a lot of the players. We called it an untapped reservoir.
And the Raiders, behind these blockers, Shell, Upshaw, they block out the center.
We wanted to win. We wanted the best players. We weren't interested in who they were or exactly where they came from.
Almost 2/3 of the NFL players are black, but there has never been a black head coach in pro football.
But those white traditionalists who controlled the game are being replaced by more pragmatic owners, led by Al Davis of the Los Angeles Raiders.
I think if any guy will be able to do it, would probably be Al Davis. I'm for you, Al. My hat's off to you.
It's not important to be consistent. It's important to be right.
The Los Angeles Raiders made that move yesterday, and Shell is their new head man.
One thing you got to understand is the only way to play this game is you got to get down in the dirt and get nasty. Let's go.
Art Shell has won in his Raider debut. He is no longer the first black coach in the NFL. He's just a winning coach right now.
I'm going to dominate, if I can, other than maybe life or death, the things that I want. I'm going to dominate them.
And he looks and throws. Intercepted by the Oakland Raiders. Willie Brown at the 30, 40, 50. Oh, man, Willie. He's going all the way. Touchdown, Raiders.
The Oakland Raiders, more than anybody else, have what you'd call a really conglomeration of misfits because these guys came from everywhere and somehow they put it together. Awful lot of credit's got to go to John Madden and Al Davis, too.
The Oakland Raiders were magnificent on that football field today, and to the people and the community in Oakland, we're proud to represent you and we intend to hold it.
Back is Plunkett. Time to throw. Deep to the end zone to Branch. It is caught by Branch. Touchdown Raiders.
This was our finest hour. This was the finest hour in the history of the Oakland Raiders. The Tom Flores, the coaches, and the great athletes, you were magnificent out there today.
Marcus Allen, play on which he should have lost 5 yards, and he goes 74 to score.
When you have great coaches, then after you have great coaches, you get great players. That's one. You have a great organization, and you tell them one thing. Just win, baby.